Hello everybody, my name is Cara and my channel is Wilde Book Garden. I am here for my second video with Literary Gladiators, and this is another kind of starter video. I'm going to be recommending some plays that I think make good starting points if you're looking to get into Shakespeare, but you're a little intimidated and you don't know where to start. There's obviously a lot of recommendations out there on where to start with Shakespeare or some like good things to keep in mind when picking up his work, but basically Shakespeare has some great work, and I think that it's much more accessible than people tend to think, understandably because of the way that we're taught it in schools and like the cultural significance of Shakespeare and everything. I think can make him seem very intimidating, but his actual works are not, I think, as bad as you think they're going to be in terms of being hard to follow or anything. But one thing that can help with that is picking a good play to start with, or a couple of plays to start with, and the most important thing to keep in mind, of course, is your own interests and reading taste, which sounds very obvious, but that really is the most important thing when considering a starting point for an author, especially one that you're intimidated by. If there's a play of his that you think sounds more interesting, or if you know from like cultural references the one that you always have been most curious about, pick that one, you know, like even if it's not one that people recommend is a great place to start, if you think it will be, then try it. But if you don't have one like that, if you're not really sure where to start, I have a little stack of plays that I'm going to talk about that I think for various reasons might be good ones to pick up first. And depending on your taste or what you're in the mood for. So what I consider the best all-around starting point, so in general, I think this would be a good place to start, is Much Ado About Nothing, which is also one of my favorites. So maybe I'm a little biased, but even aside from that, I think this is one of the ones that would be like most interesting and most fun for a modern reader. And that's partly because of Beatrice and Benedick. They are the two, like the main romantic couple, and I feel like their banter and their dynamic is it's very much something that people still like to read and see today. I love the way that they play off of each other and that they respect each other even when they are enemies. And it's just a lot of fun seeing them be tricked into caring about the other person, but then of course you realize that they did always care about each other, and their friends and family just kind of made them acknowledge it. So there's like a really great romantic plotline in this one, but I also think it's a great one for modern readers to start with because of the way it engages with some of the social issues. There's a really big subplot involving Beatrice's cousin Hero, but the way that conflict I think is handled, even if there are ways it's resolved that maybe aren't as satisfying to us, I think the way that, for example, Benedick treats Hero, I think is one of the things that makes him a real standout lead character. I love Beatrice and Benedick, and I really love the relationship between Beatrice and her cousin Hero as well. Like this real like sisterhood, this like friendship that they have, I think is wonderful. I think that's another thing that will appeal to a modern audience. And I just think that the way that this play talks about the social issues and also the way that the characters interact with each other, even if the language isn't super modern for us, I think that the way it's set up feels very modern. So that would be, I think, a good starting point. Okay, and then I also have a couple of other comedy recommendations. I feel like I tend to hear people say that if you don't know where to start, probably start with a comedy for Shakespeare, which I think is a valid point. Another one I think people might like is Twelfth Night. There's like a fairly well-known movie version of this with like Helena Bonham Carter, which is also fun. And this one is a much more like shenanigan heavy, I think, comedy than some of his others. There's like mistaken identity, there's like cross-dressing, as many of his comedies have. So this is a fun and interesting one in terms of gender, and there's the character Malvolio who gets his comeuppance in a very entertaining way. So this one I think is much more comedy-heavy comedy than some of his others, and I think like people, you know, if you've seen the movie She's the Man, which is a loose modern retelling of this, which is also a great movie, people might already be familiar with some of the basic setup for the plot, which might also help you if you're nervous about where to start. And then one of the comedies that I think doesn't get quite as much appreciation as it should is A Midsummer Night's Dream. This one is another more like on the silly misunderstanding side, although there are some dark parts that are not quite dealt with in the play. But this one has a lot of like identity mix-ups, misunderstandings. The fairies are involved in this one in a really interesting and fun way. Like the mischief they cause definitely contributes to like the majority of the plot of this play. And like I said, there are some dark parts that I don't think are dealt with as well as in Much Ado About Nothing. But in terms of the other stuff going on, I do think this is a light and fun one. There are some great speeches, of course, as in all of the plays. I don't think the romantic relationships are nearly as convincing as in some of the other plays or comedies, but this is like a fun one that I think has more quality to it than scholars often suggest. There's also some really great humor in the like mechanical, like the rude mechanicals they're called, which is like an acting troupe that tries so hard and yet they are so bad. So that's really fun as well. Another thing to keep in mind with this one is because there is so much like misunderstanding and character mix-ups and like putting the love potion on the wrong person and everything, this one might be a little hard to follow at first if you have like no background knowledge of what A Midsummer Night's Dream is about. So as compared to the other two I talked about, this one might be a little harder to keep track of the characters at the beginning, but I do think it could still be a good starting point. And then I have one play that is like a problem play, or they're also sometimes called romances. I don't think this one should be considered a romance in any sense of the word. Like problem play to me is the best description for it. But if depending on what you are looking for from the play you want to pick up, this one has a lot of really interesting discussion points, and like thematically I think it's really strong and really interesting, and that is Measure for Measure. Now the ending of this one I have some strong issues with. I've talked about this as not one of my favorite plays, but it is definitely the play I have written the most papers on in college because I just think there's a lot to say about it. But this one can get very difficult to read in places, but I think that's also what makes it a really strong example of Shakespeare's social commentary. So if that's what you're wanting from his plays, I think this could be a good one to look at. Although it does deal a lot with assault and rape culture, and I think the way that that is handled, it is sadly still very topical. But I think that there are some really great character moments, and like I said, the themes and the social commentary of this one are especially strong until the ending, which depending on the director or like how you interpret the ending, it can be taken different ways. This is one where I'm not satisfied completely with how everything turns out at the end, but I think throughout the play there are some really thoughtful discussions of what some of the characters, like what the female characters are going through. But yeah, I think this one also has a really interesting discussion on like ethics and responsibility, and yeah, just a very interesting play, even if it does make me very angry in some parts. I also have a couple of tragedies if you think that that's where you would like to start. One of them is Othello, and this is another one that I think has a lot of really great social commentary. I think that the way Othello is written in this play as like an outcast because of his race and because of just like the general xenophobia of the setting and of this time period, I think that is handled fairly well. I also think there are some really interesting discussions about again, about responsibility. I think there are some really strong supporting characters in this one. So this is another one if you are leaning towards a tragedy and you want something that's like more like themes heavy, this might be a good one to pick. If you're not so much interested in like a heavy themes and commentary one, not that there aren't any in this play, but I think that this one has less of that focus than Othello does. There is Macbeth, which is also one of his shortest plays, so that could also make it a good starting point. I have heard a lot of people that this is their favorite tragedy from Shakespeare, so I guess this is a little bit of an unpopular opinion, if any opinion about Shakespeare could be considered unpopular, because this is not actually one of my favorite tragedies. I do really enjoy it. I think it's a really strong play. This is very short. It is very compelling. I think Lady Macbeth is a fascinating character, and I think like if what you are looking for is like the high drama and like the political, like a little bit of political stuff, a really fascinating like antagonist or couple of antagonists, this might be a good pick. And then finally, I do have one history play to talk about, and in general I would not recommend starting with the histories for Shakespeare. They can be extremely hard to follow. Like just there's so many characters, and there can be many characters that have the same name, and there's just like several reasons why I think his histories are not his most accessible plays. But I did want to talk about one. So maybe like if you are a big reader of historical fiction or historical nonfiction and you're looking to get into Shakespeare, you're like, I can handle all the names. I did want to have a recommendation for that, and that is Richard III. Now keep in mind that Shakespeare's history plays are not history, they are historical fiction. So they're not really concerned with being especially historical accurate, but I do think they're really solid historical fiction pieces, and this is one of the ones that I think is most compelling. Again, keep in mind because histories tend to have to do with the English royal family who reuse names a lot. It can be hard to keep track of who is who, but again, if you need help, there's a lot of resources out there for keeping track of who is who and which Edward is we're talking about and everything. But I think this is a really interesting tragedy, and I think like this is another one that has a good combination of like danger and drama and the like plot stuff with some discussions of like villainy and do people live up to what you think of them and that kind of thing. And there are just some really like excellent standout scenes. There's a scene on a battlefield at the end of this one that is just like really chilling and really well done. This would also be a good pick if you like villain protagonists. So for various reasons, if you are wanting to start with a history play from Shakespeare, or maybe you've read some of his other plays but you don't know which history play to start with, I think this could be a good pick. Okay everybody, so those were some recommendations of possible places to start if you are wanting to get into the Bard. I picked from like a pretty wide variety of his genres and everything. And as I said at the beginning, the most important thing is that you pick something that you're interested in. But if you did need a little help deciding, I hope that you maybe got an idea or two about where to start. Let me know if you are looking to try any of these. Let me know if you have a recommendation for a good starting play for Shakespeare. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!